The air in the jungle was thick and heavy. Every breath felt warm, almost wet. As if the whole forest was alive and breathing with them, Lyris moved as quietly as she could. But the crunch of dead leaves under her boots sounded far too loud. Her people had told her never to walk alone in this part of the jungle. They had warned her about the Varkal, a beast so fast and so strong that even soldiers avoided it. But she had no choice. She was running from something even worse. Branches snapped behind her. The sound made her stop. She knew that sound. It was the slow, careful step of something that was following her, hunting her. Her heart began to pound in her ears. She gripped the small knife at her belt. Though she knew it would do nothing against the monster that hunted her, the low growl came next. Deep and rumbling, it made her bones feel cold. She turned her head slowly. There it was. The Varkal. Its body was as long as 3 men. Muscles rippling under its dark fur, its yellow eyes locked on her unblinking. Saliva dripped from its sharp teeth as it took a slow step forward. Lyris froze. Her legs wanted to run, but she knew she would never be faster. She tried to think of something. Anything, but her mind was empty. The beast lowered its head, ready to spring. Then a voice spoke from the shadows. "Don't move." It was deep, calm. And it came from a human. Lyris blinked in shock. A man stepped out from behind a tree, tall, wearing a worn jacket and carrying no visible weapon. His eyes were on the beast, not her. The Varkal stopped moving. It stared at the man, its ears twitching. The man stared back, his expression steady. Something passed between them, something silent, something primal. The air seemed to grow heavier. Lyris could not understand what was happening. Why wasn't the beast attacking? The man took one slow step forward. The beast's muscles tensed, but it did not move. It tilted its head slightly, as if confused. Then, to Lyris's shock, it stepped back, not far, but enough to show it was not attacking. Its growl faded too. Silence, though its eyes never left the man's. The human's gaze was cold, sharp, not angry, not afraid. It was the same look the beast had, a look that said, "I know how to kill you." The Varkal seemed to recognize it for a long moment. Predator and predator stood in stillness. Then the beast huffed, turned its head, and slowly faded into the jungle. Lyris's knees almost gave way. She stared at the man, trying to understand what she had just seen. How did you do that?" she asked, her voice shaking. The man glanced at her briefly, then looked toward the direction the beast had gone. It saw what it needed to see. He said simply. He turned and began walking away as if nothing had happened. Lyris ran to follow him. Wait, that was a Varkal. They kill anyone they see. She said, "They kill prey." The man replied without looking back, "I'm not prey." They walked in silence for a while. Lyris kept looking over her shoulder, expecting the beast to return, but the jungle was quiet, too quiet. Even the smaller creatures had gone still. She wondered if it was because of the beast, or because of the man beside her. Finally, she asked, "Who are you?" "Mason," he said. "Just Mason." His voice was calm, but there was a weight in it, a sense that he was not telling her everything. She wanted to ask more, but his eyes made her stop. They were not like other humans' eyes. They had the same sharpness, the same dangerous stillness as the Varkal's. They reached a narrow path between thick roots. Mason stopped and crouched, studying the ground. He touched a fresh claw mark in the dirt. "He's still following us," he murmured. Lyris's heart jumped. "You mean the Varkal?" "Yes," Mason said, "but not to hunt. Not yet." That "not yet" made her uneasy. "What do you mean?" she asked. Mason stood and began walking again. "He wants to know if I'm worth his time," he said. "And are you?" she asked before she could stop herself. Mason looked at her. Just for a second, and gave a faint, dangerous smile. "You saw what happened," he said. "Do you think I'm not?" Lyris didn't answer. She kept walking beside him, but her mind was full of questions she wasn't sure she wanted answers to. The image of the beast stepping back burned in her memory. It had looked at Mason as if seeing an equal, and that scared her more than the beast itself. The jungle was still, but Lyris could feel eyes watching them. Every few steps, Mason would glance toward the trees, his head moving slightly, like a predator checking its surroundings. He walked with silent steps, not breaking a single branch under his boots. Lyris tried to follow his way of moving, but the thick vines kept catching her feet. She wondered if the beast was still near, and why it had not attacked. Mason slowed, touching the ground again, his fingers brushing over fresh prints. The marks were deep, clawed, and spaced in a way that made Lyris shiver. "It's closer," he said quietly. Lyris looked around, her hand on her knife, though she knew it was useless. "Why is it following us?" She whispered. "It's curious," Mason said. "That's worse than hungry." They moved forward, and the light in the jungle began to fade. The trees grew taller, their roots curling like giant snakes. The air smelled damp, with the scent of moss and something faintly metallic. Lyris could hear the distant sound of dripping water. Every other noise was gone. It felt like they had stepped into a different world. Mason stopped suddenly and pointed to a wide tree with a hollow at its base. "We'll rest here," he said. Lyris wanted to argue, but the fatigue in her legs told her it was wiser to stop while she sat. Mason began searching the ground for dry branches. She noticed the way his eyes scanned every shadow, as if expecting something to step out when he returned with wood. He started a small fire. The flames were dim, but enough to keep away the chill that had begun to settle in. Lyris watched him work, noticing how he moved with quiet precision. Never wasting emotion, she thought of the stories she had heard of humans, fragile, weak, easy to kill, yet the one sitting in front of her didn't match any of those stories. After a while, Mason spoke without looking at her. "You're not from here, are you?" She shook her head. "My clan was passing through," she said. "We were attacked. I ran." Mason nodded slowly, still watching the fire. "You ran into the wrong part of the jungle," he said. "I've noticed," she replied with a bitter smile. He didn't smile back. A sound broke the stillness, a low, almost thoughtful growl. Lyris froze, her eyes darting to the darkness beyond the fire. The Varkal stood there, barely visible, its massive shape blending with the shadows. Its yellow eyes reflected the firelight. It didn't step forward, only watched. Mason didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he stared back, calm as before. After a long moment, the beast stepped aside, disappearing again. Lyris's chest was tight. "Why doesn't it attack?" she asked. "Because it's not sure if it would win." Mason said. They didn't sleep much. Every time Lyris closed her eyes, she imagined the beast's eyes just beyond the dark. At some point, she heard movement, not from the jungle, but from Mason. He was gone from his spot by the fire. She sat up quickly, scanning the trees. Then she saw him, crouched low, moving towards something on the ground. He picked it up and returned, holding the limp body of a small creature. It was freshly killed, its neck broken cleanly. He dropped it near the fire. "Breakfast," he said, and began preparing it without hesitation. The next morning, they moved again. The air was cooler, the light softer through the trees, but the feeling of being watched never left. At one point, Mason stopped so suddenly that Lyris almost walked into him. Ahead, deep in the shadows, the Varkal stood again. This time it wasn't alone. Two smaller ones stood near it, watching just like their elder. "They're learning from him," Mason said quietly. Lyris felt her stomach twist. "You mean, we're being studied?" Mason didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the largest one. Then he did something that made her breath catch. He took a slow step toward them. The younger beasts shifted nervously, but the large one stayed still. After a moment, Mason turned his back and kept walking. Lyris hurried after him, shocked. "You just turned your back on them." She said, "They won't strike from behind." Mason replied, "They want to see me face them." She didn't understand how he knew this, but every part of her felt that if she stayed near him, the beasts might not touch her, and that thought scared her almost as much as the beasts themselves, because if Mason was not prey in the eyes of the most feared predator in the jungle, then maybe he was something even more dangerous. The morning mist clung to the trees like a shroud. Lyris walked behind Mason, her eyes scanning every shadow. The ground was soft and damp, muffling their steps. But she still felt as if each movement echoed through the jungle, somewhere far off. A bird-like call echoed, sharp and sudden. Mason stopped instantly. Raising his hand for her to be still, she froze, watching the way his head tilted slightly, listening. That wasn't a bird. He said softly, her pulse quickened. "What was it?" "A warning," Mason replied, and began moving again, but slower this time. They followed a narrow trail until they came to a clearing. In the center lay something that made Lyris stop breathing. A freshly killed beast, not a varkal, but another predator, large and muscular, its throat torn open. The ground around it was disturbed, showing signs of a violent fight. Mason crouched beside the body, running his fingers along the wound. "This was done with precision," he murmured. Lyris frowned. "You mean by the varkal?" He nodded, "And it left it here on purpose." Her eyes widened. "Why?" His gaze lifted to hers, steady and unreadable. "To feed us." Before she could speak, a sound behind them made her turn. The varkal stood at the edge of the clearing, silent, watching. Its muscles were relaxed, not ready to strike. Mason stood slowly, meeting its gaze. The two locked eyes again, and Lyris felt that same strange tension fill the air. Then, without a sound, the beast turned and melted into the trees. Mason looked down at the kill and said, "He's testing me." They took the meat and moved on. Mason built a small fire in a sheltered spot, cooking just enough for both of them. Lyris chewed slowly, still shaken. "Why would a predator feed you?" she asked. Mason didn't look at her. "In the wild, it's a sign of respect," he said, "or a challenge." When they moved again, the jungle seemed to open into wider spaces. The air grew warmer, the scent of flowers mixing with the smell of damp earth. Lyris noticed more claw marks on the trees, each one fresh. "They're marking the path," Mason said quietly. She didn't like the sound of that. By the time the sun began to dip, they found themselves near a shallow stream. Mason knelt to drink, cupping water in his hands. Lyris stayed alert, scanning the other side. That's when she saw its movement, low to the ground. Her breath caught as two smaller varkals stepped into view, their eyes fixed on Mason. He didn't move quickly, didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, he knelt there, drinking. As if ignoring them completely, the young predators crept closer, their steps slow, cautious, when they were only a few paces away. The larger shadow appeared behind them. The elder varkal. This time, the beast didn't stop at the edge of Sat. As if beast didn't stop at the edge of Sat. As if ignoring them completely, the uncoined platers crept. Their steps slow, may/unlease. May/laugh. May/play. May/laugh. May/belie/perzad. My lad. I see put it. May/las lie it's a lad clad. May it side. was it, like I all see bap be it so create to sit I like to sit stead I sit to go it's up the guy do you it I believe piece good it good let's do it because the rest sits the tap the says the trees, it stepped into the open, its massive paws silent on the wet ground. It came close enough that Lyris could see the rise and fall of its chest. The way its breath curled in the cool air, it stared at Mason for a long time. Then, in a movement so sudden she almost missed it, it lowered its head slightly, not in submission. But in acknowledgement, Mason rose to his feet, standing tall. The moment stretched on, thick and heavy. Then the beast turned and walked away. The younger ones, following Lyris, finally let out the breath she'd been holding. What was that? She whispered, a greeting, Mason said, as if it were nothing. She shook her head. I've never seen anything like it. Most haven't, Mason replied, and kept walking. But she noticed the smallest hint of a smile on his face as the jungle darkened again. Lyris realized something she hadn't before. The Varkal wasn't just following Mason. It was watching him the way one predator studies another, and that meant one day the test would end. And they would see which one was truly the apex. The night came fast in the jungle. One moment, there was still a glow of light above the trees. The next darkness swallowed everything. Lyris sat near the small fire Mason had built, watching the shadows move between the roots. Every sound made her jump. A crack of wood, a shift of leaves, the distant call of something unseen. Mason sat across from her, sharpening a short blade with slow, steady movements. The sound of steel on stone was the only thing keeping the silence from crushing them. Without warning, Mason stopped and lifted his head. Lyris heard it too. Footsteps, slow, heavy, circling. Her hand went to her knife, but Mason shook his head slightly. They're not here to attack, he said quietly, before she could ask, who? The shape emerged from the dark. The Varkal stood just outside the firelight, its yellow eyes catching the glow. Behind it, two more shapes waited, their outlines larger than any she had seen before. These were not the young ones from earlier. They were full-grown, powerful, their muscles shifting under thick fur. The largest stepped forward, sniffing the air. Mason didn't move. His eyes followed every motion, reading it the way others might read a book. The beast's head lowered, its gaze fixed on him. Lyris's heart pounded, waiting for it to spring. Instead, it gave a low, rolling sound. Not a growl, not exactly friendly, but something older, deeper, Mason answered without words. Just by standing, his body angled forward, shoulders loose but ready. Lyris felt the strange energy between them again, like two forces deciding whether they were enemies or allies. After a long moment, the beast stepped back, and the others followed. Disappearing into the trees, the fire crackled softly in the silence they left behind. What just happened? She whispered, they came to see me. Mason said simply, for what? She asked. His eyes flicked toward her, calm but sharp, to measure me. They didn't sleep much after that. Mason took first watch, his gaze never leaving the dark, when Lyris closed her eyes. She dreamed of yellow eyes in the shadows. When she woke, Mason was gone. Panic hit her chest until she saw movement. He was crouched at the edge of the camp, tracing claw marks in the dirt. They're drawing us in, he said, when she came closer, not pushing us away. Lyris didn't like the sound of that. It felt as if the jungle itself was steering them toward something. By midday, the air was heavier, almost hard to breathe. They walked in silence until Mason stopped again. This time, kneeling beside a patch of disturbed earth, Lyris saw what he was looking at. Blood, dark and fresh. Mason's fingers touched it. Then he looked at her. "Something else is hunting here," he said. Before she could answer, the sound of a roar ripped through the air. It wasn't the deep rumble of the Varkal, it was higher, sharper, desperate. Mason didn't hesitate. He began moving toward it, fast but quiet. Lyris followed, her legs struggling to match his pace. They found the source in a clearing. One of the younger Varkals was trapped, its leg caught in a massive metal snare. The beast thrashed, teeth bared, eyes wild. Lyris froze. They had been followed not just by predators, but by hunters. Mason stepped forward, his voice low but firm. The beast's movements slowed, its eyes locking on him. He approached carefully, hands open, then, in one swift motion, he pressed down on the snare's mechanism and released it. The beast stumbled free, limping. It looked at him for a moment, breathing hard. Then it gave a short, sharp sound before vanishing into the trees. Lyris stared at him in disbelief. "You freed it," she said. "It's not my enemy," Mason replied. "Not yet." She didn't understand his calm, but deep down, she knew something had shifted. The Varkal's interest in Mason wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something more dangerous, something that was going to change whatever came next. The air felt different that morning. It wasn't just heavy, it carried the faint scent of smoke. Mason noticed it first, lifting his head to sniff the breeze. "We're not alone anymore," he said. Lyris's stomach tightened. "Hunters." He nodded once, eyes scanning the trees. "They've been trailing us for hours." They moved faster, leaving the stream behind, but Mason's pace wasn't just to escape. He was guiding them, curving their path through uneven ground, weaving between thick roots and hanging vines. Lyris realized he was laying a trail, not for the hunters, but for something else, when she opened her mouth to ask. He raised a finger for silence. They kept going until the smell of smoke grew stronger. Voices echoed faintly through the jungle, harsh and confident. Mason crouched low, signaling her to do the same. Through the leaves, they saw them 5 armed aliens. Dressed in dark armor, their rifles slung low. They were following tracks in the dirt. Moving with the precision of professionals, Lyris recognized their insignia. "They're trophy hunters," she whispered. "They'll kill anything for its head." Mason didn't take his eyes off them. "Not anything," he murmured. "They're here for the Varkal." The hunters paused, examining claw marks on a tree. One of them knelt, brushing the soil where Mason had passed. Lyris felt her heart race. They were too close. But Mason didn't look worried. Instead, his gaze shifted to the deeper shadows ahead. Something moved there, low and silent. The Varkal. It was watching too, its yellow eyes locked on the hunters. Mason's lips curved in the faintest smile. He stood up from cover, stepping into the open. Lyris's eyes went wide. "What are you doing?" She hissed, but it was too late. The hunters saw him, raising their rifles, before they could speak. A deep roar tore through the clearing. The Varkal lunged from the shadows. A blur of muscle and teeth, the hunters fired wildly. But the beast moved too fast, knocking one to the ground in a single swipe. Mason didn't join the fight immediately. Instead, he moved along the edge, his eyes scanning for their leader. When he spotted him, a tall alien with a shock spear, Mason charged. The fight was brutal and fast. The spear swung, Mason dodged. Grabbing the shaft and twisting hard, the alien hit the ground with a cry. Lyris was frozen, watching man and beast tear through the hunters like 2 parts of the same storm. When it was over, 3 of the hunters lay unmoving, the rest fleeing. Into the jungle, the Varkal turned toward Mason, breathing hard, blood dripping from its teeth. For a moment, Lyris thought it would attack. Instead, it stepped closer, lowering its massive head until its eyes were level with his. The two stood there, silent, predator and predator. Then the beast gave a low, rumbling sound and stepped back. Fading into the trees, Mason turned to Lyris. Wiping blood from his hand, "You led it to them," she said quietly. He gave a single nod. They needed to see each other. Lyris didn't know if he meant the hunters and the beast, or himself and the beast. Either way, she knew the balance between them had changed again, and whatever came next would be even. More dangerous, the jungle was quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. This silence felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath. Lyris walked a few steps behind Mason, her mind replaying the fight over and over. The way the Varkal had moved beside him, it had been like watching two predators who had hunted together their whole lives. She didn't know if that made her feel safer or more afraid. By midday, the light dimmed under a thick canopy of twisted branches. Mason slowed. Crouching low to study the ground, there were tracks again, not just the Varkals, but heavier, deeper, more hunters. She asked. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "These are different, older." And they're circling before she could ask what he meant. The sound of rustling leaves surrounded them. Figures emerged from the trees, tall and lean. Their skin patterned like bark. Their weapons curved and sharp. They spoke in a language Lyris didn't recognize, but their tone was clear. They wanted Mason. One stepped forward, pointing to the knife at his side. Mason didn't move. "You don't want to do this," he said evenly. They didn't understand his words, but they understood his posture, the same calm, dangerous stillness that had made the Varkal hesitate. Suddenly, a roar ripped through the air, deep enough to shake the leaves. The strangers turned their heads just as the Varkal burst into the clearing. Its massive body slammed into one of them, sending him flying. The others scattered, some disappearing into the jungle, others frozen in shock. Mason didn't waste the moment. He moved fast, disarming one before he could recover. The fight was over almost as quickly as it began. The survivors fled, leaving behind their fallen. When the silence returned, Mason turned to see the Varkal standing just a few paces away. Its sides heaved with slow breaths, its gaze locked. On him, Lyris stood perfectly still, afraid to move. The beast stepped forward until its shadow fell over Mason. They looked at each other in a way she couldn't explain, like two predators speaking a language that had nothing to do with words. Then Mason did something that made her breath catch. He reached out, his hand rested on the side of the Varkal's thick neck, just for a second. The beast didn't pull away. It only gave a low, almost thoughtful sound before turning and walking back into the shadows. Mason watched it go, his face unreadable. Lyris finally found her voice. "You're connected to it now, aren't you?" He didn't answer, but the faintest smile touched his lips, and somehow, that was enough to tell her she was right. They moved on in silence. But Lyris couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, not just between Mason and the Varkal, but between predators. A test was coming, and when it did, there would be no place to hide. The sun was sinking low, casting long shadows through the jungle. The air was warmer now, almost to still. Lyris felt the weight of it pressing on her, a warning without words. Mason walked ahead, his pace steady, his eyes scanning the trees, like he knew exactly where they were going. She realized he wasn't just moving, he was following something. Or someone. They came to a wide clearing, the ground torn and scarred from old battles. The air carried the faint scent of blood and earth. Mason stopped in the center, standing tall. Lyris looked around nervously. "Why are we here?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He just said, "It's time." The sound came then slow. Heavy steps from the far side of the clearing. The Varkal appeared, alone, its yellow eyes glowing in the fading light. It walked with the slow certainty of something that feared nothing. When it stopped a few paces away, the jungle went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold back. Mason didn't move, didn't speak. They stared at each other for a long moment, the air between them thick. And sharp Lyris could feel it. This wasn't a hunt. This wasn't an ambush. This was a meeting. A choice. The beast stepped forward, its muscles rippling under its fur. It circled him slowly, eyes never leaving his. Mason turned with it. Matching its movements, they were testing each other. Not with claws or teeth, but with presence. Then, in a sudden blur, the Varkal lunged. Mason didn't step back, he moved in. Sidestepping just enough, his hand brushing the beast's shoulder as it passed. The movement was fast, but it spoke volumes. He could have struck, but didn't. The Varkal stopped, turning its massive head toward him. Its breathing slowed, its gaze softened, then it did something that made Lyris's breath catch. It lowered itself slightly, just enough to show acknowledgement. Mason stepped closer, his hand resting for a brief moment against its neck. No fear, no hesitation. The beast gave a low, deep sound. It's almost like a growl, but calmer, and then turned away, walking back into the shadows of the jungle. Lyris stood frozen, her heart still pounding. What? What just happened? She asked. Mason looked toward the dark where the Varkal had gone. He knows, Mason said quietly, that we're the same. They left the clearing in silence, the air around them somehow different. Lyris knew the Varkal wouldn't follow them anymore. It didn't need to. The test was over. Two predators had met, and neither had bowed. But in the quiet between them, they had made something far rarer than fear, respect.